All right, everybody. I am back for another episode of Ozone Late Night, even though it's almost never late or night when I do them, but that's okay. And I am thrilled to be joined tonight by Jeff Jarvis. Now, here we go. I'm doing this from memory. I do not have a cue card. The former director of the Town Knight Center for Entrepreneurial Journalism at the Craig Newmark Graduate School at the City University of New York. Almost.
Excellent. And we should sing Craig Newmark's name too.
We should.
Craig Newmark. Okay.
I almost did a multi-recording of my voice, but I thought, no, I don't want to intrude on what Twitter already does better. On top of that, Mr. Jarvis is an author whose most recent published works are the Gutenberg Parenthesis, which I can't believe I got that word right on the first try, and Magazine, and his upcoming book, The Web We Weave, will be out on October 8th. You can also see him on This Week in Google on the Twit Network every week on Wednesdays, as well as AI Inside over on Jason Howell's. I don't know what his network is called. I think it's Techsploder is the network.
Yes, it is.
But I think
That's
AI
right.
Inside is its own show. That's on YouTube. And everything else that I might have forgotten, you can find over at buzzmachine.com. Mr. Jarvis, welcome. I can't believe I got through all that.
I'm exhausted already.
You know, that is two things. I think yours is the longest intro I've done to date for anybody. I'm pretty sure. And I think I said this on my main show. I think you're the first person I've ever had on here who has testified in front of Congress at least once. I don't know if you've testified multiple times. I think you have, right? Oh, just once? Okay.
So far, once Congress, once California Senate, once Illinois Senate. That's the beginnings of my political career late in life.
Yeah, well, some people start late. That's okay. So let's start off with Magazine, which I just finished last night, and which I adored because, like you, I have a love of magazines. I grew up with magazines. In fact, I still subscribe to one, which is New York Magazine. This is their cut issue, which I know you have a lot of love for as well. And I lament the loss of magazines. There is something that is special about them, isn't there? They occupied this wonderful space, not just in the dentist office, as you said, where we typically see them now. And they're usually, 4 years old, but they were they still are. I shouldn't say it like they're completely gone. They're not completely gone, but they, at their height, were really something that was magical. I assume that was the basis of the book, is you just wanted to write about this particular, I guess we should call it an art form, right? I mean, it is an art form because it's a synergy of writing, visuals, and in some cases, the culture curation, right?
Yeah. I mean, what fascinates me, Joe, is has become the idea of the mass media, mass marketing, mass culture, mass politics. And I consider the idea of the mass as a label, an insult to the people. It's a way not to hear people, not to know them. I started trying to write that book, and I read a whole bunch of sociology, and I started the first few pages, and then I realized I'm not worthy, I'm not ready for this. And then I realized I had to look back at the origins of the mass, and that's what led to the Gutenberg Parenthesis and me trying to explore printing and its impact on society. And I spent 10 years working on that. And then, Bloomsbury published that book, and they had a wonderful series called Object Lessons, these little short, tiny little books, and about all kinds, they have dozens of them, all kinds of topics, where you just take off a topic and see what's what. I first proposed newspaper, but they liked somebody else's proposal. So I said, how about a magazine? And as I thought about it, I found myself in the same examination of the mass. Whereas with the printing press, it was the first time you could, for multiple people, record something easily, duplicate it. And that stayed at a certain scale until we hit the mechanization and industrialization of print in the mid-19th century. The steam-powered press, stereotyping, which allowed you to make copies of pages so that you could print new editions and print more versions of them. Paper from wood rather than our underwear. The steam-powered press, quite importantly, and also the linotype, which is the subject of my next book. So, finally to the point. The magazine, I realized, had an arc of mass media. It starts around, I would say, let's say Harper's Magazine, 1850, was their mission was to say, wow, there's so much stuff now, thanks to the steam-powered press. Somebody needs to find the good shit for you. So we're going to do that. And then you go along until the late 1800s, and a guy named Frank Munsey had Munsey's magazine because he had quite an ego. And he started selling the magazine for 10 cents a copy, which was to lose money on every copy. There was the beginning of the mass market, mass media, attention economy business model. I'll lose money on the product. I'll make money on the advertising, right? And then I saw that there were ages through magazines. In the 1920s, you got Henry Luce and Time magazine. It's the corporatization of magazines. Later on, you get political magazines in the 60s. You get the thick fashion magazines late in the last century. I started Entertainment Weekly magazine in the 90s, and may it now rest in peace. It's out of print. And I got to tell the story of EW in here, which was a joy to finally do that and get that off my chest. But then I did see, yeah, you're right. I think we're at the lower ebb of magazines. And I think that's a shame because they held a place in society. They found the good shit. They brought together authors and ideas and communities around those things, and were gatekeepers of culture for good and bad. But I think they're dying. That's not to say those functions aren't still needed. On the internet, there's so much voice. We want people to go find the good shit for us again. We want, I think, people to find and nurture talent. We want the community that lived around magazines. But the magazines themselves haven't figured that out.
Yeah, you were talking at one point about how when things moved online, you lost the editors that were basically curating even the curation, right? So a bunch of people would put in stories or articles, and then the editor would decide what was the right thing. And so there's an interesting debate to be had about where the function of an editor in general is, because as we've seen, if it is all Wild West, you have as much noise, and in fact, sometimes more noise, because that's what gets attention than the actual valuable stuff. But at the same time, you don't want one or two people deciding what everybody else should see, because as you point out, those people often tend to look the same, or did for a long time. I think we're getting past that, although we're not really as far as I think some people thought we would be by now for multiple reasons. But so there is a value, I think, and that's one thing that moving everything online when everybody has their own voice, that's wonderful because everybody should have a voice. And that's, I think, the optimism of the web is, okay, especially like podcasting, but even with music, like Bandcamp is one of these huge things where people don't have to go to a record label and say, can you please put out my music? Even if only 10,000 people might hear it, well, a label's going to say that's not enough. But why should those 10,000 people not experience music that moves them? They should. And that's what something like a direct outlet does. But is there a loss when there aren't any mediators? Because it doesn't feel like it operates as well online when people get involved in curation. It does, but it's so vast that you don't have these tentpole areas that you could say, okay, like Pitchfork is one for music, but a lot of people feel like that's gone down the tubes. It's not as good. Bandcamp has like Bandcamp Daily. But are we so saturated with media and content that we have lost the ability to say, okay, these are the people who can kind of steer us towards things? It feels like we are, but maybe it isn't. You are more in touch with this, I think, than I am. So does it feel that way to you, that we're kind of a bit adrift?
Yes, I think chaos is the first natural step in big change, and we're in that chaotic phase right now. The story I love from the Gutenberg Parenthesis that I dine out on all the time is about what was supposedly the first call for censorship in print in 1470. Gutenberg's Bible came off the press about 1454, so only less than 2 decades later. Niccolo Perotti in Italy was much offended by a shoddy translation of Pliny. He wrote to the Pope saying something must be done. Sound familiar? And he said, you must appoint a censor to approve all the things that come off this new damn press thing. And I realized as I thought about it, that he wasn't asking for censorship. He was instead anticipating the creation of the institutions of editing and publishing. So just to your point, right? Who is going to find the good stuff? Who's going to nurture that talent? Who's going to decide what's worth printing? And at that time, who's also going to censor? Yes. But I think what gets us off, Joe, is the scale of our expectations. Up until the mechanization and industrialization of print in the mid-19th century, the average circulation of a daily newspaper in the United States was only 4,000. It was a good Substack newsletter. And by the way, today, if you got a Substack newsletter and $20 per head, you'd have a good business, right? For a magazine, which came out weekly, because the limitation was how often you could pull the press with your muscle. Magazine, because you had a whole week or a whole month, maybe 20,000. That's the scale we were at. Come mechanization, hundreds of thousands, millions. And so now I think our view of the world is very skewed, again, by this idea of mass, that you are not successful unless you sell something in the millions. If you're a corporation, I get that. That's the scale they operate at now. But culturally, I don't think we need to be at that scale. That's why I so love being on Twig, This Week in Google, and part of the Twit network, is because Leo and Lisa have always limited the scale of it by the interests they serve. And, I think Twit at its max gets something like 250,000 downloads, something like that. Really impressive. It's a lot but it's not millions. It's not enough to be bought by Spotify or Sirius, right? So and that's, I think, ruined podcasting because we have this expectation of huge scale around culture. And we need to pull back to a human level. I'm going to pull a prop. So on my shelf, I have this directory of every newspaper printed in the U.S. in 1900 for purposes of advertising. For those of you on audio, Joe's eyes just bugged out. It is thick as hell.
It's a tome. That is when I think of the word tome. That's the kind of book I'm thinking of. That's like, what's that, 4, 5, 6 inches thick?
Yeah.
It's gotta be. Probably
1,438 pages, right? With ads in it, all kinds of stuff in it. In New York, there were a couple score of daily newspapers, right? And that was how media operated until television came along and killed competitive newspapers and got us to this sense of broadcast and huge scale. So finally, to your question about editors. Yes, I think we need them, but I don't think it's the concept we've had of editors in the last century, which was gatekeeper, scarcity, holding things down. I think we need a different concept of editor, which is about discovery and nurturing talent and enabling conversation and recommendation.
There was a 3 words in your book. I tend to, when I read books, there's little phrases that will jump out at me. And one that I saw was from abundance value, which I thought was just a wonderful little set of words. And that's what I think, is that what we're talking about here is, okay, there's all this stuff, but there has to be a way to take the value out of it. Not eliminate, not say don't look at the rest of it, but to be able to highlight these things. But I think you're right. The chaos thing is the problem. And I don't know what the thing that's tough. And I think this is for anybody, obviously trying to predict the future is a fool's errand. But what do you envision? Where do those editors come from? What will that look like? Will it be a website that then is a network of other websites or like a podcast network where there's Twit's a good example is, okay, you've got the people at the top and then you have all these different subjects under it. Is that what it's going to look like? And if it is, again, the thing that's always the risky part of this stuff, at least to my mind, is the accountability part of it. Because much of what we've seen in terms of the tainting of the web, the really just reduction of value to the web itself has been because the people who are behind many of the things that drive what we see, whether it's TikTok or Facebook or any of these other things, their mandate is not to serve the customer the best content. Their mandate is to the market, to make money. And so there's an inherent, I don't know if sinister is the right word, but there's definitely an ulterior motive to what you're seeing, which is always a good thing is for people to understand. Critical thinking part of that is to understand what the message is and who's putting it to you and what their interests are. Like, that's a valuable lesson we've really lost in general. People just believe whatever they see. It's always been a problem, but it seems like with all the stuff that's out there, it's more of a problem. So what does that look like? And what does the accountability look like so that people know, okay, I'm being shown this because this person genuinely believes that it's the best thing for me to see? Because I think that's the difficulty. Or is it easier than I think?
I don't know what form it takes. I'm not sure. I mean, I started the magazine Entertainment Weekly at that time because there was an explosion of choice, an abundance of choice. We had the newfangled VCR and cable and all these CDs and all kinds of neat new things. And the mission of the magazine was to help people decide how to spend their precious and scarce time and money. I wouldn't start EW today not for a long shot. I probably, some years ago, would have wanted to have started Rotten Tomatoes, mechanisms of wider criticism with wider choice. But that's kind of outmoded as well right now. I'm not sure where we end up. I mean, I get recommendations, as you do, from social and from podcasts, and that works to an extent. I think that one of the lessons, though, you mentioned the platforms, and I lament this in my next book, The Web We Weave, and I lament it on Twit and Twig in Confession, where I feel bad that when Twitter came along, I kind of abandoned my blog. It's still there, and I still use it, and I post to it regularly, but it's abused because Twitter allowed me to get crap off my head and get it out there and get in the conversation. It was more immediate gratification. And of course, we know how that story ends with the nihilistic narcissist of Elon Musk taking it over. And I should have listened to Leo Laporte long ago to have supported Mastodon and supported open and federated platforms and platforms where people can find their own communities and work together. I hope that's a lesson for where we go. I'm not sure that there's singular gatekeepers. I think there's communities of shared interest that may kind of take the place of this. I'm not sure.
Well, okay, here's another element to it. So let's say that the equivalent of Mastodon. Well, what happens if the biggest danger to me in many of these things is you have these sites, platforms that start off, they're user-driven, they're community-driven, they get very popular, and then suddenly an Amazon comes along and gobbles it up. And now that entire community is potentially destroyed. We've seen it a bunch of times where something it's thriving within the community it's built, but somebody sees all those users and says, well, there's money there. I'm going to come in and offer and I don't blame any of these people for taking the money. You come in and they often, they don't have to work again for their entire lives, or they could try to start something else that they really believe in. So I never really blame the people who found these. There are people who found things looking to be acquired, and there is a bit of a, there's a bankruptcy to the value of those in many cases. But for the ones that just naturally, organically grew, and now a company comes in and acquires it, and now everybody on there, again, Discord is one where a lot of people are worried about where Discord is going because they've gotten to this scale. Bandcamp was acquired by, I don't remember the company's name, and many people are just waiting for that to suddenly become a cesspool. It's still not, but it does seem to be the pattern that, okay, homegrown or naturally evolved platform gets popular, company comes in and says, no, we're not going to alter anything. 2 years later, they kick everybody out, or their options come up, whatever it is. And within 6 to 12 months now, there's ads flooded everywhere, and it's suddenly not the place that it was. It almost feels like we need I don't know if this is the right term, but like an NPR of the internet, where it is publicly driven, that it is not meant to be a profit. I mean, obviously, somebody has to pay bills. There's going to have to be some contribution. There has to be a crowdsourced element, a Patreon model or whatever for it. But without that, how do these platforms, how do these communities feel safe from being acquired and destroyed? Because Twitter, like you said, that is the cautionary model, is how, even though it did not fall apart technically, it still works most of the time. The morality of it has been annihilated by the actions of the one person who was allowed to come in and take it over, a dictator-like action. What is the protection against that for communities that evolve naturally?
I don't know. Flickr was something we all loved, I think, in the day. It was bought by Yahoo and ruined. The founders got, I think, something like $40 million. Who can blame them? The investors, I think, wanted them to wait for $400 million, but it was a life-changing amount of money. I get it. And they've done good things since, like start Slack. I think, well, just this last week, Mozilla announced that it's shutting down its Mastodon instance, which is really a shame. It's a shame for me because I praised Mozilla in my next book of the moderation policy that they had. Yes, we're going to moderate. Here's why we're here. Here's what we're going to do. It was great. And even before my book is out, it's gone. But they're about to lose all kinds of money because of the antitrust decisions against Google. And so times are tough. And so I guess I get that. I think I take lessons in this these days from Black culture online. And for those of you who can't see me, you probably know I'm just a very white man. And I don't live in that culture whatsoever. But given the opportunity to learn a bit, I've learned much. And there's 3 books I'll point to, or 3 scholars I'll point to. One is Charlton McIlwain, who wrote a book called Black Software. The next is Andre Brock Jr., who wrote Distributed Blackness. And then the third, which I haven't read yet, is from Meredith Clark, who's a scholar of Black Twitter, who wrote a book coming out from Oxford called, I think, We Tried to Tell You. And they're unintentional sequels. McIlwain's Black Software is about the earliest days of creating black spaces online with the people he called the vanguard. And they created a bunch of amazing things that some of which, to go to your narrative, Joe, got taken over by AOL and then got ruined. Or that couldn't adapt to the changes in the technological fashions, or required all kinds of work. But they built something that showed a technological prowess that was denied them in their reputation. And that's McIlwain's point. Also, however, how technology is used against Black people. And don't we see that today? So then you shift to the age of Twitter, and Andre Brock Jr. has a celebration of Black Twitter. And Black Twitter is phenomenal. And the point, and a year ago, I had the honor of playing host to a Black Twitter summit in New York, where these scholars came, and others, another one named Jonathan Flowers. And what was clear is that Twitter wasn't designed for them. They came along subversively almost and used the affordances of Twitter to their needs and adapted it. Now, people are screaming today, Musk owns Twitter, we should all get off. I get scolded all the time for still being on Twitter. People will yell at me. And I say, whoa, there are people there I still care about. And it's easy for me to move as a privileged individual. I can find other people I'm interested in or in my interests. But to move a whole community or whole communities, whole publics, is nigh unto impossible. And in fact, Mastodon was not very welcoming to Black Twitter. Jonathan Flowers writes about this. He would try to say, this is why we need retweets. This is why we need search. And a certain snotty old technologist, said, ugh, build your own. That's what it's for. It's federated. And Flowers said, that's just your way to tell me to fuck off. It's your way to say that you don't value my experience. And Blue Sky was welcoming at first, but then they were not quick enough on some malign actors using the N-word in usernames. And so faith was broken. So the point is, they're still on Twitter. They're fighting for it. As Brock said at the event that I helped hold, he said, why should I be gentrified? There's a white flight out of Twitter. Is it worth fighting for and holding on to? I think so. I hope so. Maybe Musk will get bored and maybe somebody else can buy it. Mark Cuban said he'd buy it in a flash. I can't believe I'm now thinking Mark Cuban is the angel, but and one billionaire for another, but I'll take a slightly better billionaire over a worse one. And then Meredith Clark, who writes about this, is really looking at the cultural study of these affordances and why they're necessary and what communities need. My point is, I think that we have a lot to learn in how we create communities going forward. Mastodon and ActivityPub are steps in the right direction. And maybe my soliloquy a minute ago about scale is the problem we bring to it. We think, well, it's so small, it doesn't matter. It's not that big a deal. It's big enough. The people I know there it's big enough. And in Discord, on Twit, the community that I have there, I value every week. You particularly. You bring your creative talent and joy and some abuse of me to to
I try to
Discord.
spread it around. I try to be abusive to everybody. I try to be fair about that.
The bathing beauty pictures. I don't know, Joe. I don't know. But that's a wonderful, amazing community, and I value it as it is. But don't we know Leo Laporte and Lisa Laporte are having trouble making it work as a business right now because the advertisers were drawn away by Spotify, the big company, ruined it, bought the big guys, bought a lot of the ad technology, and then ruined the expectation of the advertisers, so that support went away. So yes, there's a lot of lessons to be learned here about what we build next. And my argument is that the internet is brand new. It's not finished. We have to build it together. I'm too old to know how this is going to turn out. But I think that we can build a better internet going forward. I just don't know how long it's going to take.
And what you're pointing out is exactly the thing that to me, I sit there and think about the fact that, yes, as you said, we only have our own perspectives on life and we only see what we see. So what you're exposed to limits what your knowledge is beyond that. So you can say, well, Twitter's lost, get rid of it. But of course, that takes away, as you said, communities that already exist. That can't just, and this is something I think Cory Doctorow points out very correctly, is you can't just move your communities in one click or two clicks, which you should be able to do. You should be able to take your stuff and move it, because the reality is, and it's not as impossible as it might sound to say this as it used to be, Musk could literally lose his mind tomorrow and ban every black individual on Twitter, should he have some mechanism to do it. And so then that whole community at the behest of one person is lost. All the value, all the history, anything that existed there is gone. And there is no mechanism that I know of legally anyway that somebody could go and sue him to get it back. I mean, there's probably a way, but I'm sure the terms of service has 18 clauses that say, no, I can do this whenever I want. And so that's kind of the thing that I think, I don't either know what it looks like, but almost some kind of natural, what do they call it when you have a historical preservation of a location, something like that, when some community has gotten to a point where it has, and I don't know how you measure this either, this is the trick and the problem and the ethereal nature of the value of things, but when something is so valuable that somebody can't do that, even if they own it, that there is some mechanism to say, wait a minute, you cannot just throw all this out. There is something here and it has a value. I think a lot of people tend to look at the web in general and say, well, it's the internet. Nothing on it is really valuable. So what? It's a blog. It's a website. It doesn't have it because it's not physical. There's this kind of old school approach to things where it's like, well, if it isn't physical, it doesn't have a value. But that throws away the value of communities that have historically been ignored or ostracized being able to gather because there isn't something physical stopping them. There is nothing between them and the other people. That's immeasurably valuable, but it also is at the threat of somebody with enough money coming in and saying, I want this thing and I want to transform it into what I think it should be, whether that includes those people who've been there for however long before or not. That's something, I don't know how that, again, I'm in the same boat as you. I don't know if that's the government, because it's not like the government doesn't have problems when it comes in and tries to regulate things. But if they don't, then we're left at, the reality is in this country and many others, wealth equals personhood and power. How much money you have makes you more valuable or less valuable. And that's not an equitable system either. And in fact, it is skewed against the people who probably need the voice the most. The people with the money generally can say and do what they want, legally and otherwise. Those without can't. So how do we protect them? How do we protect them from losing something that they've built? And again, I'm asking a question I don't think either of us has an answer to, but that's the thing that tempers my optimism for the internet is, well, yeah, but it is so temporary. All it takes is one person with malintent and enough cash, and it's gone. It's just gone.
So I just got the hardback, so I'll hold it up. In The Web We Weave, my next book out October 8th, I'll get a lot of crap for it. I don't anticipate good reviews because it becomes in great measure a media critique of moral panic in media. And so they're not going to like it. They're going to be pissed off. And it's a defense of internet freedoms, not of internet companies, but of internet freedoms. But that'll get me in trouble because people will say, don't you know the internet's ruining life? And I write a thank you note to the internet in it. And then the third criticism I know I'm going to get is, but what's your solution? I don't have one. Because the internet is a human endeavor and it brings all human frailties and human goodnesses to it. The best I have at the end of the book is to argue that we need to make covenants of mutual obligation to each other as users. We should expect that of companies, and they don't. I took part in a task force, the long title, Transatlantic High-Level Working Group on Content Moderation and Freedom of Expression Online. And it was fascinating, and I learned a lot, and it came out with a regulatory regime a flexible framework for regulation that I agreed with. But I remember particularly one day when we were talking about terms of service, and as one executive of one company said, well, these are meant only to regulate the behavior of the users. They don't say anything about the companies. And the companies expect things of us. We have no mechanism to expect things of them. And I've long argued, and I argue here too, that Facebook's big mistake, Zuckerberg's big mistake, I think, was not to have a raison d'etre, a constitution, a reason we're here. This is what we're here for. This is what is good. And that's not. And if you do that, none of us want that. The company doesn't, and the users don't want it. And if that's what you want, go somewhere else. But that means you got to make judgments, and judgments are expensive at this scale. Mike Masnick says that's why moderation at scale is impossible. But I think that we need that kind of judgment at some point to say, here's what I'm going to promise you. Here's what you can expect of me. Here's what you can hold me to account for, both at the company level and us as users. You know, I've got things I've got ashamed of over my time online. I violated the Cabernet rule and had Merlot and said what I thought, and I was an asshole to some people, and I regret that. So now I've got to try to hold myself, I hope, to some standard of not passing on junk, of holding 2 seconds to see whether I can find whether something's true, of trying to look for and recommend the best, and to try to share the little spotlight I have with others who are also deserving of it. Those are things that I should be held to account for. And we should then patronize. We're going to need companies still. It ain't going to be all charity. Liability is an issue today. It can become more of an issue if they screw up Section 230. Leo Laporte is a kind host of people on Mastodon, but he has liability for that. And right now it's tolerable. Right now it's of size that he can manage it. But the law could change, and God knows what happens. So we've got to recognize, I think, that some people have to have some resources for technology, for lawyers, for moderation, for effort. Journalism needs to be profitable in great measure too, I think, to support it. There's not enough charity to do that. So I don't want to eliminate companies, but I want to be able to know which companies I'm working with. I want to have choices of companies. That's why I'm glad there's Blue Sky and even Threads. I want Blue Sky to succeed. That's why I'm on Mastodon still, because we need competition. And I think we need to support those companies that seem to stand for something. Now, that's only going to work if we, as the market, come together and set those norms and enforce those norms and leave the people who do badly. Now, you could say to me right now, Jarvis, you are such a hypocrite because you're still on Twitter. You're thus supporting Musk. Yes, but I'm also trying to fight for what we had there. I'm trying to fight to keep it alive until maybe somebody else can take it over. And maybe that's naive, and maybe that's ridiculous, and it probably is wrong. But for now, I'll do that, and you can hold me to account for it. You can say you're not on Twitter, and I'm not going to read you there, and that's fine. But at the end of the day, the internet is the human enterprise, and it is up to us to understand how to make it better. And that's not going to come through regulation. It's going to come through hard effort of working and building things together, as we built the institution of literature.
Well, I like the idea of, okay, a company has a terms of service it has to agree to with the users. I mean, that makes a lot of sense because, as I said, if you read through any TOS that you might agree to, it is just a wall of legal text, and it is almost certainly engineered to be for the company's benefit, not you as the user.
Right. We
should have, as you said, something in reverse. And I apologize, I haven't read the Web We Weave yet because it's not out yet for me to read. So I didn't know about that. But that's actually, that I like a lot because I think in many ways, like you, I am a huge internet optimist because, like you, I remember when there was no internet. When you know, that is getting lost. We're going to age out. There's some name for the generation that remembers pre-persistent internet. But I remember having a modem, and you had to have a phone line. Yes, people remember phone lines. There were actual wall phones you had to use, and you would dial in, and then you got to. Right. Yeah, I just got rid of our home phone line because AT&T is one of the worst companies on the planet. Luckily, they're not sponsoring this show and never will because I never have no end of things bad to say about them. But remembering what that freedom was, I think that's the thing that probably most disillusions those of us who are older, because we remember that early time when, I mean, obviously profit was always there. It was always, the internet was never really, I don't like to say free internet because that makes people think no cost, but it was, there were a lot the boundaries. And more and more, I feel like those boundaries are artificial ones that are architected by companies trying to make money. I agree, you can't abolish companies because otherwise you don't have scale. You don't have scale, then you don't have people able to talk to each other. I can't talk to somebody across the planet if there's not cables and a service that allows that. But I do like the idea of, okay, there has to be a mutual agreement here. Because the reality is, and this is one thing that companies don't want you to think too much about, if you don't use their service, they don't exist. They do need the users. We have to be there, or they're not going to have anything. There is no money. And yeah, I mean, I'm still on Twitter only because there are some people who haven't migrated to another service, and I don't want to lose the ability to talk to those people. And not everybody engages with the morality of a service. That's fine too. If you don't want to have to think about who owns the service, well, you're not forced to. I don't like the person who owns Twitter very much. That's why I don't do much over there, but I try to boost others because it is their platform. I love Blue Sky because it is still the Wild West. As you said, it's had its problems. It will probably at some point be acquired. I think everybody there is now kind of waiting for that too, where they're like, all right, how long is this going to last? But it is kind of a weirdo community for artists and wackadoos, and those are my people. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to hang out here. And kind of in line with that, I was thinking, because you point out in magazine how the web is full of junk, kind of what we've been talking about. And so that brings us to the topic that is inescapable in the modern era, which is AI, which you can go into multiple different avenues of debate. But one of the things that was interesting is, and I don't know if you talked about it on this week's Twig, I don't remember if you talked about this specific element, but Google is going to be introducing something in YouTube that allows AI to guide creators on what to make. They're calling it the Inspiration tab, I think. And they're going to suggest titles, content to people who don't know what to make. And the thing I thought about was, pre all the AI hype machine that we're caught in, before even that was around, YouTube was already very, is it homogeneous, right? That's how you're supposed to say it, homogeneous? Or, yeah, not homogeneous. I've heard people say that, but I never thought that was the right pronunciation. Either way, it all looked a lot the same. Same thumbnails, same titles, same in some cases content in the first few or 5-10 minutes of the video, because people knew that that's what was successful by somebody else who had 4 million views. That was pre a machine based in the company that determines the popularity of videos that others are copying. Now, put that in there. Is YouTube not at risk of just becoming a wall of everything being almost the same thumbnail? Is that not just, that is the biggest thing to me about AI that I don't like is, as you've pointed out many times correctly, it's not alive. It's not smart. It has no inspiration. It has no creativity of its own. All it can do is remix or reinterpret what already exists. And so if that's suggesting new content to somebody who doesn't know what to make, is that really a better YouTube that we're going to get?
So in November, I'm going to Mainz, the birthplace of Johannes Gutenberg, where I will bow down before various shrines. And I'm giving a talk to ConCon, which is the content convention or conference, I'm not sure which, there. And I'm going to be kicked off the stage immediately because I'm going to say that content is dead. Content is a crappy business. Content is a Gutenberg era notion. The fact that we see ourselves in this position of manufacturing this commodity we call content is the problem we have. That is insufficient. But then I'll say to them, as they start to gang the stage, the point is that you can and do already do more than that. It's not about making something called content. It's about having relationships with people and bringing them value and connecting with them and understanding them and listening to them, not just speaking to them. And those are all the opportunities the internet gives us now. And if all we do is make more stuff. So what we did talk about on Twig was Mr. Beast's 30-some page guide to working at Mr. Beast, right? And it is just make more content, make more content, make more content. The more content I make, the more money I make more content. And people blame Google now for being worse at the search. And my argument is, I'm not so sure it's Google's fault. I think it's the internet's fault. I think it's people like Mr. Beast, and it's these companies that come along that just fill it with crap, And it's real hard for Google to find this stuff, and they get in trouble when they make judgments, so they've got to be careful about that. I want a more selective Google, and that puts more power in Google's hands. Okay, bad cycle going on there. But somehow or another,
only if there's no accountability. If accountability is there, if transparency exists, then I don't mind it. That's the problem, is if we can see what's going on and understand it in plain terms, I don't think that's bad.
Yes, but what'll happen is that you'll see in Texas and Florida, where they're trying to insist that platforms have to carry noxious speech. It's my right under the First Amendment in this country. Editing is speech. Choice is speech. Choosing what to carry and what not to carry is itself protected speech. Well, now you have the right wing in those states trying to say, no, you must carry our speech. You can't make judgment about it. That's why these companies are scared of making judgment. That's why Zuckerberg is backed way off of any politics and says, I don't do news, I don't do politics. Parties and puppies, that's all we are. Well, that means we have a worse and worse internet as a result. So I think we have to have an internet that does have judgment, but we have choices of judgment. I go back to this book of newspapers and magazines. If you wanted to read the Daily News versus the Tribune versus the Herald versus the Times, you had choices. They all covered pretty much the same stuff, but from different perspectives. And they could argue with each other, which had value in and of itself, before we ended up with monopoly media structures. So I think we end up in what looks to us today like a chaotic world. It is actually a world that I think is more appropriate and natural. But I think the web is being ruined, and AI, now to your point, is indeed going to ruin it even more. My friend Matthew Kirschenbaum, who is a professor at the University of Maryland, who wrote a wonderful book called Track Changes about a history of word processing, which is wonderful. He wrote an essay for The Atlantic called about the textpocalypse. And his argument that as AI produces all this content and then feeds on and learns from that content and produces more from that, we're going to end up with this gray goo. And I think that is what's happening. And so it finally and completely, utterly commodifies content as a concept and as an industry. And we have to create things that bring value to people in different ways, not new ways. We've always had community. We've always had value and service. But we have to explore those ways rather than just thinking we're going to churn out more shit because we can.
Yeah, I think that is one of the most detrimental things about specifically like big platforms like YouTube is the fact that it basically replicates this idea that you have to put out videos constantly. You have to just keep making stuff, as opposed to, and many of them, again, all the same, but also this idea that you really can't, if the prevailing theory, which does seem to be, is okay, people have to watch your videos for about 10 minutes or so before it'll be monetized for anything worth it. You know, there's all these yardsticks and goalposts that come out every so often, and they do seem to be backed up by some people seeing success or not. But that just destroys anybody's freedom to, not freedom, I shouldn't say it that way, but it de-incentivizes somebody to say, well, I didn't want to make a 10-minute video. I wanted to make a 37-minute video where I broke this thing down because nobody else is doing that. Instead, it's, what's the 6 things that you didn't know about your iPhone? And it's a thumbnail of somebody screaming next to a phone. And there's 80 of those. And that person thinks, well, I can't survive here otherwise. There is no, and again, this is just the modern version of the creative struggle in general, is how do I make money at being creative? Because creativity is not something that you can slot into a box and say, here's how you do it. We know how cars are made. You know how to make a successful car. It's got to have 4 wheels that have tires on them with a steering wheel, and it has to go. You know, you can't reinvent the car too many ways. If you can't make a car with no wheels on it, I guess that's a plane then. But when it comes to creativity, there is no easy way to say, well, here's how you could be successful. Experimentation and inspiration from odd sources are almost a built-in part of it. So if a platform is set up to reward a certain type of content, how can people really be creative on it? Doesn't that de-incentivize people? And I don't know what the solution to that is either.
Well, and what's the end goal of creativity? It's not always making money. It's the release that I have. The former chief economist at Spotify, I'm forgetting his name suddenly, but he's written about this, where if you look at what happened to music, and we know this, there was a limited number of artists and a limited number of genres, and now both have exploded. And some people make money at that. A lot of people want to make money at that, but a lot of people want to just create. And they want to have an audience that satisfies them. It's like podcasting and blogging too. And we need to respect that. That's okay. Because the expectation that we put in is, once again, is about volume and scale rather than about quality, rather than about relevance. I think there's other words. So my next book that I'm working on right now, writing right now with papers all around me, is a history of the linotype, the machine that automated typesetting. Before that, all type was set one letter at a time. And I went to the Rare Book School recently and learned how to do this myself, which was a lot of fun. And it mechanized that. So I was just reading up about the Crystal Palace in the 1850s. In New York, which was an exhibition of all this kind of technology, including steam-powered presses and electricity and all kinds of mechanisms that existed. And I just picked this up just this morning. George Palmer Putnam, I presume the publisher Putnam's, in September 1855, spoke to a group of publishers at the Crystal Palace. And he said that for the 12 years ending in 1842, the number of books published was 1,115. Half of those roughly were original, half reprinted. And so it amounted to 52 per year, while in 1853, there were 733 books published in that year alone. So there was this explosion. Meanwhile, because it was just starting to get cheaper because of the steam-powered press, and starting because of paper from wood, you saw that the press runs went from 1,500 to 10,000. And you started to see that growth. Well, for all that time before, 1,500, 2,000, 3,000 books was a success. We defined it that way because that's all that the mechanisms of the business could reach for. I'm not saying we go back to that, but there's a huge gulf between that sense of creativity and reward for it and where we are today. I'm working on, I mentioned this on AI Inside, I don't think I mentioned it on Twig. I just wrote a syllabus for a course that I might teach in AI and creativity. And I'm really interested in trying to talk with students about how they may or may not use these tools for their own purposes of expression. That interests me. Now, I don't want to homogenize their voices and views into all of that came before from all who had the power to publish before, which is what's trained the machines. But I do think, I can't draw. I can't do the graphics that you do. But I can now use a machine not to do the stuff as good as you, but I can at least play in that field in ways that I simply could not before. What does that open up for people to express themselves? I find that interesting. I think that's valuable. But if we use AI just to produce more of the same shit that we already have, clearly that's bankrupt. That's going to mess up the world. And we have to break free of that.
Yeah, I think that's because I'm pretty neutral. Because a lot of creative people, especially artists, are dead set. They're just, destroy AI, get rid of it. And number one, that's impossible. So let's start with the fact that it's not going to happen. But the other is, it assumes that everybody has the ability to create art the same way. If somebody is not able to have full use of their limbs and they want to draw, am I really going to tell them they can't draw? Oh, no, sorry, because this tool might mean that I lose $5. You just can't ever have something you create. That's ridiculous. So the idea that this thing is a tool is the best part of it, is the idea that it facilitates you to be able to do something that you wouldn't have been able to do before because of whatever reason. It really doesn't matter why. You just couldn't do it. Okay, well, now maybe you have a way to do it. I think that what a lot of people are really reacting to is the way these things are marketed, which is, because there was that one, and I don't remember what the executive's name was, but something about this is going to get rid of jobs that never should have been there before, which I have to admit made me want to punch the screen when I read the words, because I'm sitting here going, and I looked because I was like, stop, see if this person has a creative background. Maybe I'm making a judgment too quickly. And I looked at this individual's background, no creative background, all engineering and business. Okay, so now I understand where the frame of reference is. It's, okay, we're going to sell this to somebody. instead of having to pay X number of dollars to a human, you can pay slightly less to us for a tool that will replace that person. But I'm sitting here going, that sounded like something from somebody who's not a creator, and sure enough, it wasn't. And that's, I think, the problem with the way this stuff is largely being received, is it's being rolled out as, oh, this can do it all for you. And I think the truly destructive part of that is it completely annihilates what is so wonderful about human creativity, because it boils it down to a database. You're saying that now people's creativity is a database, that they can't bring anything to it, or you're telling them to rely so heavily on it, as opposed to saying this is a mechanism for delivery. But what do you want to create? Where is this coming from? Think about that first. Don't just type in prompts on a machine and see if it looks neat. Because it might look neat, but it's going to look the same as 1,000 other things by other people who've typed the same prompt, because there's nothing from you in it. And without that, for whatever reason, whether it's just for people to see it, to make money, that's up to you. But that's where creativity comes from, inside. And a machine simply cannot deliver that because it's not alive. And even if it was, it's not inside your brain.
Right.
So don't rely on it as the entirety of your creation. Use it as a delivery vehicle, but start somewhere else. I think that's where a lot of the negativity comes from, is that it isn't shown as a tool. It's shown as the replacement for what creativity is. And I think that's what drives a lot of people crazy.
Yeah. Now, on the other hand, there are things that can drive a creative person crazy. I went to a Bertelsmann's investment arm, BDMI, has some irregular sessions with some of their companies, and I saw one with a company that enabled illustrators to use it, and there an artist was there who does cartoon work, and he said what drives him most nuts is having to do the damn backgrounds. And so here was a tool that let him train it on his own style. And he could do lots of things with it. He could replicate a background with other instructions, or he could say, "Ooh, that's a picture I took. I really wanted to use that." And so he tells it to use that, to adapt it to his style to come up with the background. And then he can edit it and change it. And it takes out what to him is the drudgery of it, because what he cares about is the character and the story. I'm fine with that. It's spell check. Right, typing alone. Typing is a mechanistic aid to what I do, and so I think that if we look at those tools in that way as tools, I think that's fine. Now, again, that's for somebody who can do the background. What about somebody who can't? Is it fake for them to do that? No, I don't think so. Any more than a camera was faking versus an engraving. We'll understand these tools as they go, and I think we'll harness them to our will as we wish.
Yeah, and that's kind of I'm in almost total agreement on that, because like in Procreate, which is what I mostly use in the iPad, now I could draw a perfect circle if I really wanted to sit there for 30 minutes going very slowly in a circle, or I can make a general circle, and then a little thing comes up and I hit it and it says circle, right. And then I can adjust it. There's brushes that create chains in some case. There's one that I have that has chains. Now, could I draw every chain link? And have I? Yes. Did I enjoy it? Not at all. It's terribly boring. Doing every little individual chain on an illustration for most people probably isn't all that delightful. So would it be nice to have a brush that does that? Yes. It just takes, as you said, the drudgery out of it. And not to mention that Photoshop was AI before it was. All this stuff existed. Again, I think what is and this is, I've made this point on some of my short shows, is it's the intent of the people behind it. And I think that's the thing that a lot of people are really reacting to, because it is just another tool. So, and as you said, if it allows somebody, because I can't play music. I mean, like Jason Howell plays music. I know people who play music. I can't understand it. I couldn't write you a song if you gave me every instrument in the world. It would just be a lot of noise. So could I take a guitar and make some noises and say, okay, how do I play this? And it lets me play something. Well, that's great. You know, but it came from me originally. It's the other side of it where, and I think it also, and this is something I wish more people would point out, as opposed to just saying destroy it all. If you just let the machine do it for you, it takes away the personal part of it. You should want to be more involved as opposed to letting it all do it for you, because that's what makes it unique, is the person. Just like most things, is it's the person, not the machine, that's going to make it special.
That's what makes it, right. It makes it valuable and special. And so when ChatGPT came out, one of the things I speculated on, and I've said so on Twig, is, could this help expand literacy? Which is kind of what we're talking about. Because people who are intimidated by writing, which is most people. I write for a living, but most people are intimidated by writing, whether it's a book or an article or an email or a PowerPoint or anything. Could it help them do that? And I talked about that. And then in the management class that I started, the program I started, I was talking about this. And two of the students in the class, it's executives, said, "Whoa there, white man, listen to yourself." One of them runs a site for First Nation in Canada. The other runs a site for imprisoned people. And they each said quite properly, are you trying to homogenize, as I said before, these unique voices into the voice of power? And I said, you're right. You're absolutely right. And so the output of the tool has to be in the control of the person using it to their desire and their goals. If we impose the use of the tool for the purpose of mandated code switching into the voice of all, that's an ill service to the person and to the culture as a whole, because we end up again with just more of the same. And that's the problem.
Yeah, I was thinking of, when I was reading magazine, I was thinking about for there used to be, and there probably still are some, but there was a heyday of underground cartoonist scenes. That's where like Robert Crumb and other people, they were putting out their own self-published things because their work was never going to get into a major magazine. Nobody was ever going to publish that stuff. And so they took it upon themselves to put that stuff out there, and it permeated and it hit with people. And I mean, I have digitized collections of a lot of that old stuff because I love looking at that outsider stuff. That's where, to me, the interesting stuff lies, is when you see people who veer out for some reason, and whether it's, something crass and what you could consider valueless, well, it's not valueless, or because they're making a point that there is no platform for them to make that point. And that is another element. What you're talking about is, if the data sets are all curated by people who all look the same and think the same, this is why I really do not like the fact that it's called artificial intelligence. It just connotes something that is not there. People think, oh, well, it's learning. It's a neural learning. No, it's not really learning. It's just mixing things around. I would love to see a machine that could actually come up with an original thought. I'm not afraid of that. I would welcome it, but I don't know when we're ever going to get there. And until we do, it's not actually creating. It's just kind of smushing things around. And the gray goo thing is kind of a good example. So that is the danger of it.
And that kind of thinking leads to moral panic. There, you can now play the video. And to, I think, ill-conceived regulation as a result. So you have Yuval Harari out there with his new book, Nexus, going out there raising moral panic about artificial intelligence being different because it can think and make decisions. No, it doesn't. It spits out predictions of word orders. That's all it does. And he's crying danger and peril and threat to us because of this machine. And we're going to end up with laws like we see in California right now, which is on the governor's desk, to try to blame the technologist for everything that the technology might be made to do by a human being because it's technology. No, if we recognize that it's a human being using it, the responsibility, I think, lies primarily with the human being, not the technology. Same was true in printing press, same is true on the internet, and same is true in AI. That's not to say that AI can't have some governors involved, but they will be imperfect. People will, by their nature, find ways around them. And we've got to recognize that, and we've got to hold those people who do that responsible for what they choose to do and how they choose to use those tools.
I'm curious what you think. It feels like with AI, even the people that are running these things are themselves at times weirdly paranoid. I'm generally used to the people behind these big companies, the tech companies, kind of being unified on, okay, yeah, this, they all somewhat kind of line up in general when it comes to the technology itself. But with AI, you've got people saying, no, it's going to destroy the planet, and people who are saying it's going to, but within those, it's strangely divided for what I'm used to as far as the people at these levels. Does it seem like that to you? Like there's a higher degree of hysteria and kind of divide among the people running these things?
It's a paradoxical situation where you have the makers of the tools are labeling themselves Dr. Frankensteins, and they have reasons for doing this. One is marketing. Look how powerful we are. Look, my machine can destroy mankind. Another is regulatory capture. I'm the only one who knows how it works. Listen to me about how we should regulate me. Another is stock valuation. We're the cool ones. We're all ahead. And another, and I've mentioned this, and eyes roll on twig when I say this, is TESCREAL, the acronym of the various faux philosophies that guide many of these folks, including Thiel and Musk and Altman, from transhumanism to long-termism, with effective altruism in the middle. And doomerism is about everything I just said. Look how powerful we are. But it's worse than that. I encourage people to look up the writing of Timnit Gebru and Emil Torres, and they have a seminal piece now explaining TESCREAL. And they track it back directly to eugenics. It is about white men in power who fear loss of power to those who may follow, and who hold themselves above others, think they are superior, think that they are, if not the Ubermensch, they are the ones who are capable of making the Ubermensch, even if the Ubermensch is now digital, is now made up by them. And so you have Nick Bostrom, who was kind of their chief philosopher, who just got bounced from Oxford University at last, who contended that our obligation as a society, and theirs as technologists, is to the 10 to the 54th possible human beings, real and virtual, in the future. And if we mess that up, if we destroy that, then we've destroyed everything. So we, the technologists, says Bostrom, we who believe in these philosophies, we know best. So invest in us the power and resources to make those decisions so we don't do that. But what this really says is that present day problems are trifles. The Holocaust, some would say, is a trifle in their view, which is incredibly offensive. Poverty and disease are to them trifles. And that what matters is this long-term thing. So you have people like Musk who want to plant chips in heads and make enhanced human beings, who say that he should have so many possible babies because his babies are going to be the best, who says that we should, and he should lead this way, populate not just Mars, but the universe. And if we can't go past Mars as human beings, then we'll create the machines that populate the universe. It is an incredible statement of hubris, individually and as a group, to think that they know best for all humanity and all the future, and they will build that future. That is eugenics. That's scary shit. So you see in the technology world, what they've done in the AI world is they've mangled some terms. So, for example, safety. The definition of AI safety in these companies is about doomerism. The definition of AI safety from Timnit Gebru and Margaret Mitchell and authors of the Stochastic Parrots paper is about environment and bias and labor and current problems. But if you talk doomerism, you distract from, squirrel, all of those very real current problems, and instead try to act like what really matters. No, don't worry your heads about that. What matters is the 10 to the 54th in the future, and we'll be in charge of that. So what it does then is it skews the discussion at a policy level. So if you talk to politicians about safety, they hear the word safety and they think, oh, OpenAI, safety. Oh, Anthropic, safety. No, that's the wacky end of safety. Safety is listening to the women and people of color who are in this field, like Timnit Gebru, and they should be heard on this. Neerat Weiss-Blatt, we've had on Twitter oftentimes. She's really following these days about how much money is being spent on creating courses and clubs and things like that at places like Stanford to try to bring people into this cult-like thinking. I know I'm starting to sound a little cultish myself and being paranoid about this, but what I say in The Web We Weave is the technology doesn't scare me nearly so much as the technologists in this case.
Yeah, no, and that's that's for me the same thing. Is it's the intent of the people behind it. A tool is a tool, right? I mean, it is the classic example of a hammer. You can build a house, you can cave somebody's skull in. It's not the hammer; it's whoever's wielding it. And I agree that is the thing that concerns me, is that the people who are driving this stuff, and to smaller degrees, like the person who said, oh, we don't need creative jobs. That's a small scale version of it where it's like, yeah, that's a very specific perspective. But then there is the bigger and more frightening perspective, which is, okay, I only really want people around who are like me. Everybody else is disposable. So I'm going to, in theory, architect that future human. And what they don't say out loud, but of course, if you really look at what they're saying is, and at that point, hopefully all the others who we don't care about will have fallen away because we've basically created a nice single lane for the people who are like us. And the rest, well, if they're alive, okay. If they're not, who cares? It's that type of disposable other that they really see as inconsequential to what they're doing. So I don't think it's paranoid. I think it's actually a very real concern because, to go back to something I said a while ago, these are the people who have concentrated wealth. And as we know, the people with concentrated wealth tend to be able to move the levers of regulatory bodies, government, individuals with different controls more easily. And that does start to sound like you're a nut, but it's not untrue. It is the way that it is. That's where the literacy of people to be paying attention to who's driving this stuff and to not be distracted by the kind of silly surface level stuff is really vital. Again, the idea of, well, why are they saying this? What does it actually mean? What is the end goal of what they're saying here? Yeah, okay, go past AI is going to destroy the planet, because it's not. It certainly may make things worse for the rest of us living on the planet because of the environmental impacts. There is that possibility. I saw that Amazon wants to fire up, I think it's 3 Mile Island again.
Microsoft
to
does.
Microsoft wants to fire that up.
Yep.
Not that I think necessarily that's if they do it safely. I'm not anti-nuclear or anything like that.
I had
but it's
to make
just
a
the
joke,
more the point
though.
of,
What could possibly go wrong? But yes, yeah.
yeah, I mean, they can't seem to keep Windows from crashing every time they put out an update. Do I really want them in charge of a nuke plant?
I saw about 3 people come
know.
up with the same punchline. It gives an entirely new meaning to the blue screen of death.
It does bear watching. I'll say it like that. But let's be honest, that's not because Microsoft wants to provide more energy to the locals around there and give them cleaner, freer energy. It's because they need to power what is essentially a profit engine. That's what they're doing it for. And obviously, I know Bill Gates and Microsoft have philanthropic, enterprises here and there, but some of these decisions are when you look at what they're doing, intent matters. It does matter what the person behind something has historically said and done. And if it sort of points to a future where people who are already marginalized will be more so, then I don't know that that's something we should be backing up. And again, that's not to say destroy AI. It does say that you have to understand what the people in charge of it are trying to do. And the trick there is, specifically with AI tools, is you need so much scale and power and engineering knowledge to make these things work even as well as they do, that it's very difficult to envision an upstart or a smaller group of people being able to make a competing product. That's another problem, is competition inevitably gets squeezed out as the competition buys up all the resources that others could come in and do anything with.
Well, that's another angle on AI here, is open source AI. Some measure of the doomsters say that open source is awful because that means that rogue agents can get around the guardrails. Well, first, they believe the guardrails are going to be effective, which they're not going to be. And second, all that does is make the big, powerful companies more big and powerful by giving them exclusive use of these tools. And here I respect Zuckerberg and company, where they have made their models at Meta open source, and I think that's vital. Mistral is open source at a certain level in France, and I think that's incredibly helpful because it leads to more competition, more testing, less centralized power in this technology. But it didn't happen, but the EU was talking about trying to limit, even forbid open source. And the fear is that the California AI bill could greatly affect open source because if you make a model, you don't want to open source it because you can't be responsible. You can't be held to account for anything anyone might then do with that open source. So what do? You have to hold control of it. And that yields regulatory capture, centralization of power. That'd be bad. We've got to recognize that this is a technology, like every technology before it, that can be used badly. Now, that's not to say that it's fully neutral. You can build in affordances and biases into the technology to do that. If you can create a social network where you look for fire and heat and you promote that. That's a technological choice you make in that. So I guess you could make a hammer that's a little less sharp than others. But there's no way to, in the design of the original tool, eliminate every possible bad use. But if you then think that there is, then you inevitably end up with a concentration of power.
Right. And I agree. That's the thing, is that you can't stop these things now that they're out there. I think that it is the importance is understanding what the data sets are, where they're coming from, and who's behind them. And again, with open sourcing AI, that's great as a foundation, but can it actually be scaled to be, well, maybe it doesn't need to. Maybe, again, the scale thing is a false choice. Maybe we don't need a world where any of these things really scale, and instead we simply make small kind of concentrate, almost what they talk about with the little nuclear reactors. Oh, in theory, you could have a little nuclear reactor, could power your home, and then you don't have to, have pollution. I don't remember what they have a word for the miniature nuclear reactors. Maybe we end up in a future where you basically run your own little open AI or whatever, your own AI sphere on a local network, and it only serves you and then has an outlet to the internet. Maybe that is better than thinking that everything, there is this idea that everything has to scale up, everything has to become ultra successful. I don't know that that's necessarily a healthy view either. Obviously, it can't be 5 people running an AI network. That's never going to succeed. But I don't know that it needs to be 5,000 people running one either. So maybe there's a middle ground that these open source AI models end up in.
Yeah, I think there is. And I'm not expert in this by any means. But in essence, you're starting to see it in the fact that you can run things locally. You can run a model locally on your phone with the new Pixel and with, we think, the new Apple. And this is part of what the Stochastic Parrots paper said from Gebru et al., is that just making models bigger and bigger and bigger is not the answer to anything. It makes them less manageable, less attributable, and really doesn't gain you that much. The question is, I think, what are the, and the problem is that, well, this is the issue of it being a general tool. And by that, I don't mean artificial general intelligence, which is absolute bullshit in my view. But it's a general tool insofar as you can train it and then ask it to do all kinds of different things. In that sense, it's like a printing press. Once you can print with it, you can print anything. Once you have AI, you can do lots of different things with it. But the question we need to ask, I think, is train it to do what potentially? Right now, we're in the phase of, oh, I didn't know it could do that. Cool. And that's fine, and that's experimental, and I think that's really interesting. But at some point, to your point, Joe, if you say, well, I need something that's going to help kids with homework, that's a limited sphere of what its capability should be, I think, fairly limited, and also limited with its learning set and knowledge base. This is to help kids with arithmetic. You don't need it to be the super machine that can do anything. And by the way, that super machine now can't add. It doesn't help that way, right? But do you build something that is more purpose specific? That presumes that you know what your problem you're trying to solve is. And right now, AI is in the position of a solution looking for problems.
Yeah, well, they're all trying to make it a Swiss Army AGI. That's what they market it as. Is it can, but I agree with you. That is, like, the idea that you can have one of these tools that analyzes cancer diagnostics and find something years ahead of when a human doctor, not because they didn't know what they were doing, but because they couldn't do pattern recognition at the speed and scale that this thing could. Nobody's not going to want that. Nobody wants there to be more cancer. If this thing can reduce it, which they already have some metrics showing it does, that's a great use. That's a specific, as you said, a driven use. This is a specific thing. Or to your point about arithmetic, I was terrible at math in school. I'm still terrible at it now. My father wasn't particularly good at it, so there were times where I needed help with something, and it's not his fault. He wasn't dumb. He just did not have a head for mathematics, which is probably why I don't. And so would it be nice to be able to consult something and have it come up with a way to explain it to somebody like me who thinks more visually as opposed to putting a fraction here and doing all this stuff? Yes, that's wonderful. It's also very specific. It's kind of the same thing that I've seen a lot of people. I know Jason Howell just talked to Michael Fisher, who I've talked to a couple times, and he was talking about, he laments the multi-purpose technology in general, that the thing that makes it so boring to get a new cell phone now is because they just do everything. There's nothing really unique about most of them, and that he has gotten this, he's fallen back in love with single-use devices, which is something I like single-use devices as much as I like a super-powered computer in my pocket. That's great. Don't get me wrong. I like that when I'm lost and I need a map and it could just call it up. But I also do enjoy the fact that I have a little recorder, and all it does is record. And it does it flawlessly. I don't have to worry about an app update crashing the recorder, or that suddenly now there's a subscription for me to talk for more than 5 minutes, because that would kill me right there. So it's nice that there is that, and there is a value in purpose-driven technology. It also allows people to do it better because they can focus. Telling an engineer it has to do everything generally doesn't result in a great product no matter what, whether it's AI or something else. So I do like the idea of the future of these things is limited. Not limited meaning it can't do things, limited in that it's only going to do these 3 or 4 things that you need it to do. I think that's ultimately what we actually want.
Yeah, I think Notebook LM is an example of that, where it can do an amazing number of things. And I had fun with Jason this last week where I had it make a podcast about my book. But it's still it's RAG based, basically, holding to the document that you give it. It has a skill set in essence. It can summarize things. It can create glossaries of things. It can organize things. And that skill set from the learning set deals with the data you give it, and then it can respond in these ways. And it doesn't go beyond that. So I think that there's, we see the beginnings of that now.
Yeah, and that's, I do think probably that's where they're going to end up, because the other thing I wonder about is what the cost of some of these larger models are going to be. Because right now, yeah, that's what all this stuff when it first comes around, they're giving it away for almost nothing. Yeah, that's because they want you to start to depend on it. I mean, it's kind of the Adobe model. I'll freely admit I'm in that shackle because I grew up with Photoshop. I've used Photoshop since version 3. So do I love the fact that I have to pay what I think is probably an inflated price for it? No, but I know Photoshop. I'm good with it. I'm quick with it. Could I learn something else? Yeah, and if they double the price next year, like I guess Canva's doing with their stuff, which just seems, I mean, that's the danger of the subscription model too, which is kind of a subset of what we were talking about earlier, where a company could just change the deal on you, which seems unfair as well. But there is this thing where once they get it to a mature point, whatever that would look like, I don't even know what a maturity is to these companies. I'm not sure they know. But they get it to that maturity where it's, let's say, okay, we're done with it, or as done as something like that can be, ready for mass production. What is the cost going to be? It's not going to stay like it is. It's going to go way up because most of these companies are not making that much money if they're making money at all. And there's going to be an energy and a scaling cost when everybody's using your model. Again, the idea that you all have to come back to them. Well, they're going to have to start building bigger data centers. They're already running them to pieces on this stuff. So I do think the future may inevitably become smaller models, whether they're ones you run locally or not. There's going to be a mix probably, but it's not sustainable at the way they're doing it now. No. I just don't think that could possibly be. So that's the other reason I don't worry too much about it, because I don't think the Skynet can actually happen because it's too expensive. Yeah. There's no way they're going to run it. Yeah. So yeah, there's that fear has never really made sense to me anyway. Now, let's move into funner topics, because there were a couple things, because we've done a lot of heavy stuff, and that's fine. It's worth talking about. Obviously, we can talk about it for a while. But one of the things I liked that you were talking about in magazine was that you lament how the web is ugly now, which is funny because I have seen people lately in certain places saying, hey, build better websites, make websites again that are, because a lot of people have just, like you were talking about with your blog, just kind of abandoned them because there is this. I remember somebody said that to me because I asked them if they had a website, and they said, why? There's no point. I just post on Instagram, and that's basically the same as a website. And I thought, really? Because I put some effort into mine. I'm not going to say it's the prettiest website on the internet, but I actually took time with it. And I agree that the web used to be a really interesting, vital, colorful visual place, and it sort of has somewhat reduced into a blandness where a lot of it looks the same. And that doesn't seem like it's good for the web in general, because it de-incentivizes people looking and appreciating the time that people put into it. So do you miss exciting and interesting websites from the early days?
Well, I think since you started with magazines, let's start there. I think that, if you go from the era of hand typesetting into the era of the linotypes, things were still very linear, right? And then you hit photo composition, cold type, and you could do different things. And the first reflex is to see what it can do, and some ugliness ensues. But it was limited ugliness. Then comes I'm suddenly having a senior moment. The technology behind a PDF is PostScript. PostScript. So sorry. So now you have PostScript where a letter isn't a letter anymore. It's just a shape. And now you can do anything in any shape in any way. You can, as long as you can describe it digitally, you can make it. Well, of course, that yielded desktop publishing, and it was ugly as hell. It was awful.
GeoCities. Remember GeoCities?
Yeah.
The joke of it was great.
Well, first it was in paper, and then it was online, and flashing things and horrible, ugly things, right? But then professionalism and design came in. Then what ruined it, and I witnessed this firsthand, was advertisers. When I started the local sites for Advance for the new houses, the ad person would come in and say, we had a set number of ads and things you could buy, and they, oh no, I just sold it. They don't want the ad everybody else has. They have to have a new avail. They have to have a new unit. And so we would create new units and new kinds of things all over, and we wanted to jam the pages with as many ads as possible. And then we wanted to try to hold on to people's attention and prove they saw the ads, so we become interruptive in all kinds of ways. And we made the web, we in media, made the web horrendously ugly, just awful. And so the good phase of web design was there, but it was limited. I was privileged to be hanging around when we started Epicurious, which was very good looking in the day. Medium, I think, is aesthetically just beautiful and really nice to work in. So there are examples of things being good, obviously, but media as a whole have just uglified the hell out of the web. And as long as advertisers rule, we still need them, but as long as they can rule and say, no, I want to be really as obnoxious as possible to get attention as much as possible, we're aesthetically doomed.
Yeah, there does seem to be a correlation between keeping attention or diverting attention and how ugly the site is. If it's because I think then it's less designed as a site that you're supposed to be kind of going around in and experiencing, and it becomes more as a vehicle to sell something or deliver something specific. Because I think about one of my favorite books, the New York City Transit Authority Graphic Standard Manual, because I am a lover of the iconography of the New York City subway. And this is one of the greatest books if you can ever get a chance to get one. I think Standards Manual is in New York City, so that place is there. But this book has just giant pages of literally how they drew some of the signs. Like just, okay, it's a T. It's just a T. That's all it is. But you know what? That's the kind of stuff that I eat this stuff up. So I do miss when websites felt more intentionally design oriented when they were, and there still are, although many of them are for design firms, but that stuff is still there. But there is this, and I guess it's the same as everything. There does become a kind of blandness to them. And I do feel like the idea of the website has been, it's reduced, and that's a shame because, well, I like opening up an app on my phone and seeing it condensed and made for a phone's thing. We have these beautiful giant screens that are 4K that have all this ability to show color and everything. And so many websites are a single column in the center of blankness. And it's mostly just text and, a couple of obviously procedurally generated ads. It's like all this landscape is here. Why not use it? Because it is just another form of expression. A well-designed website is every bit as beautiful as the Sistine Chapel. I know some people want to light me up for saying that, but I'm sorry, it is. It's still an expression of art and form. So I miss that too. Magazines, physical, like I still do get New York. It's probably the only one left, but there are magazines like Juxtapose is a really good art magazine that still, I think they still publish. I hope they do. I haven't gotten it in a while, but yeah, it does feel like it has become as engineered, and I think you're right, advertising is a big part of that as anything else. And the problem is it takes all the personality out of it.
Having condemned advertising, let's give advertising credit, because before magazines, before you got substantial circulation that made national brands possible, books and magazines and newspapers were just pure gray text, period. And the ads were small, classified like ads. And there were tons of them. They were tiny. Come magazines, you had the opportunity for an advertiser to bring in white space as a mechanism of impact, and larger typefaces, design typefaces, and illustration and things like that. So advertisers really, I think, improved the aesthetics and the opportunities of design in print in that day. And of course, there have been some beautifully designed ads over the years. I always think of things like Volkswagen ads back in the day with the bug and simple typography were amazing, and the vodka bottle ads and things like that were iconic in the culture. So they can do it well. But a lot of the problem now is the economics of the web is not about branding, it's about direct response. And so a lot of that was done for branding, and there were efforts to say the web could do that too, and it could, but the volume of business isn't there for that. So instead they do obnoxious little crappy ads.
Well, they also have to do that because in magazines, you already bought the magazine, you had it. So if you saw an ad, there was a good chance you'd look at it, you'd linger on it. You don't just click away. Whereas with ads on the web, I feel like they're worried that you'll just click. So it's like, okay, we just have to fire the information at you as fast as possible, because if you just go up and click on your next bookmark or you go to the next page, we've lost you. Whereas in magazines, well, you had it, you bought it. So, as you're leafing through it, you didn't, I'm sure some people did, but I often liked a lot of the ads too. Print ads, when they're done well, are exceptionally beautiful in many cases. You see really great usage of that. Even on TV, there can be very funny ads. But again, it's because they somewhat, now it's not really TV, but streaming, whatever. But there again, I think it's because they know somewhat that you can't speed through it. Yes, the TiVo changed that. People could do ad skipping. But even then, I don't think people skipped as much as on the web. If you see something, you just instantly click somewhere else. And I think that has devalued the idea of what good advertising can be. Because good advertising can be a lot of fun. I remember a lot of ads from when I was younger, and I know they're selling me something, but there can be an artistry there too. So I agree. I don't want to demonize ads entirely. And for some people, it's the only way that they can make revenue, or could, until, like you said, podcasting, just the floor fell out. So advertising in and of itself isn't bad. Bad advertising is bad, just like bad web design and everything else. Which leads me to a question. Mm-hmm. What fuels your optimism for the web now? Because there does feel like there has been it's all bad. You alluded to this earlier. The web is just full of its negativity and hostility, and it's terrible. It's ruining kids, as if video games and movies, and I think you pointed out books themselves weren't going to ruin kids in history. They always said this. This is always the blame of whatever new media is it's going to destroy the youth, because the youth is so fragile it can't take anything. So how do you stay optimistic with all of what feel like these kind of negative headwinds, not only within the framework of the internet, but from the way that people frame it?
The source of my optimism is the same as the source of my pessimism. It's up to us. And from print, I'll go back to the Gutenberg Parenthesis, which is my touchstone. After print, the first 50 years, the first half century was figuring out what it was on its own, because at first it was mimicking the scribes. And only after a half century did the book start to take on the qualities that we now know, like titles and title pages and page numbers and indices and so on. But at that time, by the way, the business of books was in a shambles, because the printers competed for the same ancients, and the market was saturated, and they were saved by Martin Luther. Well, along after Martin Luther came Peasants' Wars, and eventually the 30 Years' War. And maybe we have a 30 Years' War ahead of us. I don't know. But there was some measure of chaos before you got to where we are. But in the long, long, long run, we figured it out. And print became something that was not destructive all in all, that was beneficial to society, and we used it well, and society understood how to do that. Now, come the internet, there are malign actors who use it badly. We don't learn our lessons from the past. That's why I wrote the Gutenberg Parenthesis. We give power over, as you and I have discussed, to some of the wrong players. We don't take responsibility sufficiently. But we can learn all those things in the long run. I think we can. And the other thing, Joe, is that I think we've got to keep in mind that the internet is a fucking miracle, and that we're lucky to be alive in this time. In the book, I write a thank you note to the net, mainly from the pandemic. Without the net, the pandemic would have been, a million people died. It was plenty bad, but it would have been for all of us worse, in that many of us could hold on to our jobs and still go to school. And I could order things from Instacart for my father in Florida till I rescued him from that state. And I could stay in touch with friends and family. And I could do it suddenly with video in more substantive ways. It's a gift. And I think we have to be appreciative of that. we come off, I think, as cynical and nihilistic when we reject that gift and say, oh, it's all crap. Well, in doing so, we not only reject the opportunities it gives us, we also reject all the people who are on it. The value of the web is that I can meet you, and you can make badges about me on a podcast, and we can build a relationship as if we know each other, and that's a tremendous gift. That's amazing, and it wasn't possible before. You and I are both old enough to remember life. I'm older, but we're old enough to remember life before the web, and it's phenomenal. Now we can ruin it. And we can ruin society on it, and we can screw this up badly. Absolutely we can. That's the point. We have to learn the lessons from the past so we make good decisions, so we make wiser decisions about it. And that responsibility lies with all of us. And part of what I say in The Web We Weave is that every time you share something awful and shitty, you've decided what web you want. Every time you've encouraged a fight or fought with somebody, you've made the web you want. Every time you instead find something good to recommend and share the spotlight with things that are creative and interesting and informative and expert and experienced, then you're making that web. And we all need to do the latter.
Yeah, one of the few things I think that Twitter did that I wish other services did more of, I don't know if Mastodon started doing this too, is where it says, do you want to read this before you repost it? I think that one little suggestion, even though most people probably ignore it, is so immensely beneficial because it does, I hope, for some people make them stop and instead of reflexively responding with something, actually understanding it more. Because I think I had that same instinct that many people did for a while where it's like, oh, I saw something, article, title says this, I'm just going to reshare it because I like the title. Well, no, it's actually beneficial to read the article too. Because I'm in much the same boat, is I am generally an extraordinarily cynical and pessimistic person. That's just my natural reaction to the world because I expect the worst of people. But when I'm online and when I'm talking to people, like when I do my art streams, the thing I always say at the end is make something, create something. You have so much, because when I was in school, when I was in college, when the internet was still relatively nascent to most people, I mean, having a T1 in college was like the greatest thing in the entire world. Mm-hmm. We went into senior year of illustration. The guy who ran the program said, okay, understand that almost none of you are going to make any money at this. So, you can go ahead and complete this, and that's great, but you're not going to make any money at this because creativity is immensely difficult to be successful at. And at that time, there wasn't online portfolios. There wasn't Patreon. There wasn't direct donation models. There wasn't Bandcamp. There wasn't podcasting. There wasn't Libsyn, any of the other things that can allow people to express themselves and to find an audience. And now you could be successful without ever having to run an ad, without ever having to give a pitch meeting to somebody to make it as if your content is worth having. And again, like you said, that never existed before. There was never the ease of what it is. I mean, this stuff I've got set up just for this show, if I tried to do this 10 years ago, would have probably cost 10 grand. And now it's very small, and most of it is, I could put it in a closet and put it away. And the level of connection we've got when we were younger was impossible. Nothing loaded this quick. Nothing was this great. So it is and I think this is a human byproduct, is you tend to ignore the magic of the time you're in because all you see is the problems with it. That is a very human reaction. But you're right. There's so much possibility with this thing that I can email you. We can set up a show when we're on opposite sides of the country, and we can talk like this, and the thing hasn't gone down. Even 5 years ago, that might not have been possible. Yeah, well, hey, if it does at this point, we got enough. I'm okay. I never expect anything to be this smooth. But you're right, this is a miracle that this exists and that you can talk to people anywhere. And then, of course, you still have to be human about it. That is the one thing that the web has unfortunately amplified, is when you don't have to face somebody, it becomes a lot easier to be a terrible person. When you can just type something in text and then kind of snicker to yourself and walk away from it. Unfortunately, that allows for a very negative human tendency, which is just to do something mean in the moment because it's funny to you or because you don't have to think about the impact. Empathy is one thing that there should be more of when it comes to our interactions online, is to think, what is the impact of what I'm doing? But if you come to it positively, and as you said, you amplify the things that you think are good, as opposed to saying, well, that sucks, that does hopefully lead to others doing the same thing. That's one of the things. I don't post much anywhere, but I try to repost others who are trying to do creative stuff and say, hey, this is really great. Go look at this or whatever, because I want to drive attention towards those people. I could as easily look at somebody who drew something that clearly was no effort and say, wow, you suck. But what is the value of that? Why? What is that giving me? What is that giving them? Nothing. So I do agree it is what we make it. So,
which is also the question is, when do we call people on bad behavior? I think that we could go overboard with that. But at some point, if we let something go, if we let something slide, if we let somebody be racist or sexist, then do we bear some responsibility? If, on a more benign way of looking at it, if somebody says something they don't realize is offensive or difficult, is it our responsibility to help teach them? Now that too brings some hubris, like you and I, each of us knows what to teach. But at some point, how do we set norms in society other than that kind of negotiation? That we're in a constant process of negotiating our norms.
Well, that brings up one of my personal pet peeves is the word ignorance, because I feel like people only use it in a certain way and they don't think about the fact that it can mean two things. The one type of ignorance is, okay, if you only grew up around people who looked like you and you never had any interactions with people outside of them, that's not you being maliciously kind of closed-minded. It's you weren't exposed to anything. If you're ignorant because you know better and you just want to be hateful, that's something else. Though it's the same word, but it has very different meanings. I benefited because I went to art school and I walked in and saw wackos everywhere. And I went, wow, there's a lot of really different people in the world. If I hadn't had that experience, I don't know that I would be the same way I am now, because, my parents were traditional Italians, which has that negative side for certain things. I'm not going to say they were the most open-minded people. They were not cruel people, but they grew up around everybody who looked like them. Because I was wildly different, I think I'm the only artist in my family. For whatever reason, whatever genetic thing resulted in that. So I said, I'm going to go to art school, even though they told me, don't do that. Go to school for something you'll make money at. I'm like, no, what do you know? I'm going to be drawing comics when I'm 20. It's going to be easy because I'm an idiot. But that benefit, not monetarily, but to see different people.
Yeah.
That's the smartest thing I ever did, was making that stupid decision, because I got exposed to so many wildly different people and realized there was nothing bad about it. It was actually wonderful to see a diversity of different people who saw things in such really weirdly different ways. So yeah, that is, I think that's where my optimism is too, whereas, or I can talk to somebody who has no parallel life experience to me, and I would never have known of that person without the web. So it is a miracle. I think, I don't use that word very often, but I think it's appropriate in this context. This is such a singular invention of humanity, on par with almost anything else, penicillin and all the rest of it. It is that important because it broadens our experience. It allows us to talk to other people. And now I'm just rambling. But yeah, I love the web too. So I guess that's the shorthand for it. And at that note, oh, you know what? I did want to, there was one other thing.
Okay.
So you don't like baseball, I read in magazine.
It's not that don't like, I just never got it. I think it goes back to this. We'll go to start a therapy session here. I'm tall. I'm 6'4". People don't know that when you're on a podcast. You think, when Paris Martineau and I met each other at an event that I held in New York, we both looked at each other and said, oh, you're taller than I thought. Each of us. I'm clumsy as hell. I was terrible at sports. I lived in dread of coaches and PE and being mocked and not being picked for the teams. And so I just came to generally hate everything about sports, which is too bad because I know people get joy out of it. But I didn't know anything. One of my dreads as a kid was to go to the barber and fearing the barber would start saying, well, how about those Phillies? I don't know. I just didn't know anything about it. So it's always been kind of a sore subject with me, and that I'm ignorant as hell of it. My son was for a while, not so much now, but he was for a while, give him sympathy, a Jets fan. So I would try to bond with him watching that, which is tragic. And I can find it interesting, but baseball, go after me however you want. I just find it incredibly boring.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's okay. The reason it's funny to me is because in New York you have one of the best baseball teams that's ever existed. Maybe not in the current state. Don't get me wrong. And I'm much the same way now. I wasn't. Yeah. I am taller. I'm not as tall as you. I'm 6'2". I was never thin, so I was never good at sports. I dreaded all that too. But baseball, for me, I think it was driving with my dad, and we would be listening to the Yankees. So it was more of that type of thing. And now I've just kind of retained it. I just found it funny because you're in one of the premium baseball towns in all the country, because we listen to even the Mets, who I despise. Now you can direct your hatred towards me because I don't like the Mets, even though they have a great mascot. I do love Mr. Met.
Right, even I know that. My father was not. My mother wasn't into sports at all. My father wasn't into sports much at all. He liked golf. Boring.
So that's funny. My dad liked golf too, and I hate it. Oh God, I hate golf. It's just
and so he always wanted it to be the way we would bond. And we'd go golfing. And so we had, one time I went out with him, and I was basically caddying or something out with him, and he hit an errant shot and hit me in the head. And then he and I went to the driving range, and I thwopped back and hit him in the shins. And we quit. We just stopped trying after that. We bonded.
Well, you made it further than me. My dad tried to get me to learn, and our neighbor was there at the time, and I lost control of the golf club, and it hit her dead in the center of the chest, and that was the end of golf. My dad knew at that point. Oh, she was fine. I mean, I wasn't swinging hard enough to do any damage, let's put it that way, but he knew at that point that he didn't want me anywhere near other people when it came to having a metal object. So, but it was the same thing. Yeah, he was into golf, and I could never I mean, if I want to fall asleep, golf's it. I'll put golf on, and I'll be out in 5 minutes. But yeah, it was the same kind of thing. But we listened to baseball, so I guess that was it for me.
That's even worse.
You know what? Okay, I'll say this. It can be worse because most baseball teams have really shitty announcers. I've noticed that. But the Yankees, for a long time, had one of the best two-person announcer teams, which was John Sterling and Susan Waldman, who I adore, both of them. Now, John is retired. He's coming back for the postseason. I know I'm getting into sports ball. Sorry, everybody. He's going to be back, which his voice is like, that's my childhood. And Susan Waldman I always liked because there weren't a lot of women in broadcasting. And she's extraordinarily knowledgeable, and she's funny, and she loves the team, truly loves the team. And that to me makes a difference. So listening to them was actually in some ways better than watching the game because of their interactions. And I think that was the thing I really responded to is I've had this love of kind of radio and people talking. And there's this thing about, especially live. For some reason, live is always different for me. It's somehow better. Even though it's really not. You listen to it later, it's still the same content. You're going to hear the same things. But there's something about the fact that you're hearing it live has always been more appealing to me. I don't really know why. So yeah, that's honestly, could I play baseball? No, I couldn't. I couldn't hit a ball. I couldn't throw a ball. I couldn't do anything. I could barely throw for any distance whatsoever with anything, any type of object, even a dart. But I grew up with it. So I think this was just funny when I saw it. I'm like, wow, in a baseball town, because I do miss New York. I will say I miss the food. There are elements. California's great. I like it out here. But there are times where I'm like, to get a good pretzel from a guy on the street. Geez, to get a good pretzel. It don't exist out here.
Well, and the reason to go to a baseball game is the hot dogs.
Oh, well, I will say that too. The Giants, my wife is a Giants fan. Oracle Park, some of the best food I've had, period, since I've been out here. I mean, the food is fantastic. You go and don't even watch the game. I mean, the last time we went, we just walked around the park because it's right there on the water, and there's all these people out in kayaks and boats. And that's what I mean is I like baseball, but ironically, the baseball itself is probably the thing I care about least. It's more of the experiences around it, which is... So maybe I'm not that big a baseball fan after all. It also helps to like the Yankees because they win a lot. So I'm lucky that way. And then you like Cacio e Pepe, which I will say, the best Cacio e Pepe I ever had, and people will probably hate that I say this, I worked at a store, which you probably remember, called Brookstone that used to exist. It was basically a attempt at doing another Sharper Image.
Right.
And I worked at a mall, and the mall had these little pocket stores that would come and go every so often. And somebody put this little Italian place up there. And to look at it, you'd think
was
it was
this on this coast?
Yeah, it was on East Coast. Yeah, okay. It was in the Poughkeepsie Galleria. That's where it was. Second floor, back where I think Sears, if it still exists, I don't even know if that mall, I think it still exists, but back there, if you ever go there, it's not there anymore. But this little place, they would make it, they give it to you in a styrofoam container, no name, no branding, no nothing. The best I ever had in my life. I've tried to replicate it ever since. I can't get anywhere near it. And I just remember that. And I'm like, man, I can taste it now.
Yeah.
Oh, when it's made well, it is so sensational and it's so simple. All you have to know is the fundamentals on a couple things. So I share your love of that because I love to make stuff. I love cooking, and especially Italian food. Well, what would you expect? That's my background. But yeah, that's one of those where it's like put it together in 10 minutes, but you put it together right. Nothing like it. So, and as always, I have no way to end my shows. I try to do a good opening, but I have no way of ending them. So, Mr. Jarvis, thank you very much. This was an absolute blast, as I expected it would be.
Well, it was a lot of fun, and I want to end by thanking you for the joy and creativity that you bring to Twig and Twit. It's really a lot of fun to be able to interact with the audience, and when somebody does something crazy or stupid, you're going to come up with a really funny badge about it, or you're going to poke them a little bit. It adds to the joy of doing that every week, and I think that community matters to me more than most any community I'm part of. And so thank you for being part of that.
They have built an exceptional group of people, not only in terms of who they have on there, which is funny because I talked to Paris Martineau not too long ago. I did a show with her, which was mostly about Baldur's Gate 3, which is fine. But like this one, actually, I'll be honest with you. I was somewhat nervous coming into this because like with Paris, I'm like, oh boy, these are exceptionally smart people. And I don't know that I can come up with anything that's going to be interesting to talk about because I look at it in the mirror, I'm like, hey, dummy. So I don't. So I was like, oh man, I don't know. This might be a complete train wreck. But Paris was great. You're great. I'm talking to Jason Howell in like 3 days.
Oh, perfect. Oh, good.
It's just funny how these lined up, which I feel bad because I talked to him and Aunt Pruitt right before they got laid off. And I went, oh, great. I'm the Twit Jinx.
Yeah.
Come on my show and you're not going to have a job. Fantastic. They're going to hate me. But it didn't work out that way, thankfully. So, and AI Inside is a really fun show, as is the Tech Explorer. I mean, Jason is...
He's great.
One of those people that you watch him, you're like, yeah, he's getting to do what he wants to do, which is great. That's always what you want to see.
So folks, go to AI Inside and subscribe to it and help it grow.
I will link to it. I'm putting a note now in my show notes, AI Inside, to make sure I have a note for it. So yeah, and if you don't support or if you don't know what Twit is and you're into technology at all, go there now. Because it is a great community. And yeah, Discord became, like you said, during the pandemic, that was like a lifesaver for me because it was just, man, the amount of people and friends I made through that, and Twit has been part of that. So, I'm delighted to be a part of it. So again, thank you for coming on.
Thank you, John. I'm honored.
Reminder of Gutenberg Parenthesis. I'm pronouncing that right? Parenthesis. Well, whatever. I got the opening right. Parenthesis. Magazine, which was immensely enjoyable. I delighted in reading that book because, boy, that pulled a lot of memories for me. And Web We Weave will be out on October 8th. And everything else we've mentioned and buzzmachine.com. So thank you, everybody, for listening. Go watch Jeff in different places. Go watch and click on the links in the show notes. I noted all those books that you mentioned. So I'll have links to that stuff. And you can find everything else that I've done over at ozonenightmare.com. That's where all the archives and everything is. And if you're sick of me, don't click there because you'll be sick of me more. But outside of that, have a wonderful, when will I post this? Usually I'm going to have a wonderful week or weekend, depending on when you listen to this. And on this note, I'm going to shut up because I don't know how to end an episode. So I'm going to shut up now. Thanks for listening.